with Library and Information Services at UHN, and I will be your speaker for the next hour or so. Today, we're going to be talking about the basics of planning and performing a scoping review. So this is an introductory session focused on the basics and getting started. If you haven't tuned into the prequel to this session, The Right Review for You, I strongly recommend checking that one out as well. There is a recording available on our website on the workshop and training page, and that session covers information on different types of knowledge synthesis to help you understand what type of literature review, whether scoping or systematic or rapid, best fits your research question, timelines, goals, and purposes. Over the last few years, we have learned that it takes a village to run these types of online sessions smoothly. So it's not just me here. We have a few members of the library team on this call. I'd like to introduce them to you really quickly. Raluca is our workshop coordinator. She will be posting resources in the chat today. We also have Melanie monitoring the chat, since I can't see the chat or any of you while I'm presenting my screen. If you have any questions during the session, type them out in the chat and she will address those or bring them to my attention. And I hope that we will have some time at the end of this session for some additional Q&A as well. So today we're going to understand the purpose of a scoping review, know the types of resources you need to do a scoping review, be familiar with Arksey and O'Malley's framework, which is the pivotal article about how to do a scoping review, and know how to access the UHN Libraries services for knowledge synthesis. So before we go further, so that we're on the same page, we'll talk about what is a scoping review. Here's a definition that I think sums it up well. A scoping review or scoping study is a form of knowledge synthesis that addresses an exploratory research question aimed at mapping key concepts, types of evidence, and gaps in research related to a defined area or field by systematically searching, selecting, and synthesizing existing knowledge. So scoping reviews can be undertaken to answer a range of research questions. Why might you do a scoping review? Well, to examine the extent, range, and nature of research activity, to determine the value of undertaking a full systematic review, to summarize and disseminate research findings, and to identify research gaps in the existing literature. There are two main differences from a systematic review. First, a systematic review usually has a well-defined, narrow question where appropriate study designs can be identified in advance, while a scoping review tends to address broader topics where many different study designs might be applicable. Second, the systematic review must quality appraise the included studies, while a scoping review doesn't necessarily assess the quality of included studies. But like a systematic review, methods used throughout the different stages should be conducted in a rigorous and transparent way, and the process should be documented in sufficient detail to enable the study to be replicated by others. Now that we know what a scoping review is, how do you know if you want to do one? One helpful framework to determine what type of review you want to do is TREAD, which stands for time, resources, expertise, audience, and data. So these are the elements for a scoping review. They take as much time to do as a systematic review. You will want to make sure you have the appropriate resources and expertise, and you want to consider your audience. You also want to make sure there are enough studies in this area to warrant a scoping review. Here are some of the things you should consider or be aware of before you undertake a scoping review. First, you should research your topic to make sure a review has not already been done, and also to make sure there is enough research out there to make it worth your while to do a review. Presumably, you'll want to publish your scoping review. So you should research the journals you would want it to submit it to make sure they accept scoping reviews and if there are any particular requirements. Of course, you should consider your budget. You may need to purchase software or order full-text articles. You also want to make sure you have at least 2 people on your team, as you will want 2 independent reviewers when you are screening your articles. If you haven't already done so in your budgeting, you will want to consider what software you need. And you'll also want to consult guidelines for scoping reviews and put together a protocol, 2 steps which I will cover in the next slides. There are several guidelines out there that can inform scoping reviews, and they should inform your process, your methods, and what you want to be reporting. Links to these guidelines are provided in the handout that will be sent to you after this session. I will briefly mention four. First of all, there's Arksy O'Malley's article on scoping studies. This is the pivotal article about scoping reviews and where we get our steps from. Second, there's a PRISMA for scoping reviews. This is a reporting guideline, not a guideline about conducting your review, but it tells you all the elements you should include in your manuscript. Then there's PRISMA for searching. This helps you to know what elements of a search you need to report so that your review is transparent and replicable. You'll also want to look at the chapter about scoping reviews in the JBI manual. That's chapter 11. Right now, I'm just going to go to the web and show you the PRISMA website. This is where you will get your PRISMA flow diagram to include in your review. If you go to extensions, you will see that there's an extension for PRISMA for scoping reviews and one for PRISMA for searching. If you look at the PRISMA for scoping reviews, it has a fillable checklist, either in PDF or Word. It also has the statement and an explanation, along with a video. Before diving too deep into a review, you want to consider writing and publishing a protocol, because one of the expectations of a high-quality scoping review is knowing and outlining what you are going to do before you start. This is an opportunity for feedback on your process. It increases transparency and ultimately enhances the quality of your review. So what should you include in your protocol? The JBI handbook outlines these aspects of a protocol. I'm going to go over a few of the elements that might not be so self-explanatory. So, source of evidence selection. The scoping review protocol should describe the process of source selection for all stages of selection. So based on title and abstract screening and based on full text screening. And the procedures for solving disagreements between reviewers. For any scoping review, source selection, both at the title and abstract screening and full text screening stages, is performed by 2 or more reviewers independently. Any disagreements are solved by consensus or by the decision of a third reviewer. The software used for the management of the results of the search should also be specified here. This could be Covidence, EndNote, or JBI Sumari. Any information about a pilot screening process and how inter-rater reliability might be determined should also be added as well. Then in the data extraction section, a draft charting table or form should be developed and piloted at the protocol stage to record the key information of the source, such as author, reference, and results or findings relevant to the review question. Charting the results can be an iterative process whereby the charting table is continuously updated. It is suggested that the review team become familiar with the source results and trial the extraction form on 2 or 3 sources to ensure all relevant results are extracted. This pilot step should be done by at least 2 members of the review team. Analysis of the evidence. For many scoping reviews, simple frequency counts of concepts, populations, characteristics, or other fields of data will be all that is required. However, other scoping review authors may choose to perform more in-depth analysis, such as descriptive qualitative content analysis, including basic coding of data. Presentation of results. At the time of protocol development, the reviewers should provide some plan for the presentation of results. For example, a draft chart, a figure, or table. Now, where can you register your protocol? Prospero, where you register a systematic review protocol, does not accept scoping review protocols, so you need to rely on other resources. Both Open Science Framework and Figshare are websites where you can post your protocol for free. Alternately, there are some journals that will accept a scoping review protocol as a submission. Now that we've talked about some of the prep work, let's talk about the steps involved in doing a scoping review. These are the 6 steps we're going to cover, which are directly from the Arksy and O'Malley framework. Identify the research question. Your specific question will be utilized to define search terms, inclusion and exclusion criteria, and interpretation of data within a scoping review. While a systematic review question is focused and specific, a scoping review question is broader. However, it is still important to have at least two core concepts. That's because having too broad a question will lead to too many search results, and it makes it difficult to develop inclusion criteria. So you wouldn't want to do a review just on animal-assisted therapy. You'd have too many results. It's too broad. Something that would be more appropriate could be, for example, what is known from the literature about the use of animal-assisted therapies in people with mood disorders. There are a few different frameworks that can help guide you in building a good research question. Here we have an example of concept boxes. In this example, what you do is you put your question at the top, and then you create columns for your different concepts. In each column for each of your concepts, you will brainstorm synonyms. This will come in handy when you're at the searching stage. Identify relevant studies. The next step is to identify relevant studies. We are not going to go over how to search in this workshop, but just know that searching for relevant studies does require some work. That is why we recommend that you consult with a librarian or information specialist. You would then choose appropriate databases, conduct an exhaustive search in each of those databases, and supplement your search by checking reference lists and doing gray literature searching. Just as a reference point, this is a basic search. This is a type of search I'd use to find articles for a background search or just a standard literature review. It would not be appropriate for a systematic or scoping review. Whereas this is an example of an exhaustive search on the same topic. You'll see it's far more detailed, far more broad. This is casting a wide and comprehensive net. That would be the expectation for a systematic or scoping literature review. Search. Librarian participation in the knowledge synthesis process ensures that published review search strategies are of high quality and better search reporting in knowledge synthesis. If you partner with one of the librarians at UHN for your scoping review, we do the search for you. For more information on how librarians provide support for knowledge synthesis at UHN, check out our Knowledge Synthesis Services page. When you go to UHNLibraries.ca, under Services, you will find the Knowledge Synthesis Services page. If the principal investigator wants an information specialist as part of the scoping review team, we have a work plan that will need to be completed and submitted at the time of the request. Another thing to keep in mind. Starting at this stage is your data management. Like any research project, a review means managing a lot of data, and it's important to have a plan and the right systems in place. Each of the records you've identified through your literature search process are like a participant in your study. How are you going to keep them organized? There are various software for citation management. Examples are EndNote, Zotero, and Mendeley. EndNote requires purchasing, but Zotero and Mendeley are free options. We have a link to a handy comparison of the different products in the handout, and Raluca will put that link in the chat. We also have two workshops, one on EndNote and one on Zotero. So if you're using any of those products, you might be interested in looking at the recordings for those workshops. Using something like a citation manager is valuable because it allows you to create a library for your data and help you manage it. This is especially important because reporting the flow of your process is an expectation of scoping reviews following the PRISMA reporting guidelines. This is where you need to lay out how many articles you pulled from databases and other sources, how many duplicates you removed before screening. Did you remove anything else from your data set before you started screening? How many results did you screen? How many did you exclude? all the way down to how many studies you included in your final analysis. When indicating how many records you identified from databases, I recommend including a breakdown of number of citations from each database and not just the total. The next step is study selection. The team should meet to discuss inclusion and exclusion criteria, and this should be specified in the protocol. It's an iterative process, so these criteria can change as you go through the citations. 2 reviewers are needed to independently review the titles and abstracts, and 2 researchers should independently review the full text articles as well. When you have a disagreement on study inclusion, a 3rd reviewer can determine the final inclusion, or you can do this through consensus. A draft charting table or form should have been developed with your protocol, but it is acceptable to refine this at the review stage. You have to report all relevant outcomes data for each source of evidence. Here is an example of a charting table. It is helpful to pilot test this charting form. You can have 2 authors independently extract data from the first 5 to 10 included studies using the data charting form and meet to determine whether their approach to data extraction is consistent with the research question and purpose. According to the JBI Reviewer's Manual, key information to chart for each paper includes author, year of publication, origin of country of origin, that's where the study was published or conducted, the aims and purpose, the study population and sample size if applicable, methodology or methods, intervention type, duration, comparator or outcome measures if applicable, and key findings that relate to the scoping review questions. Next, you will need to collate, summarize, and report the results. The scoping review seeks to present an overview of all material reviewed. In terms of analysis, a scoping review will need some analytical framework or thematic construction in order to present a narrative account of existing literature. But unlike a systematic review, there is usually not a quality appraisal of the evidence found. So usually there is a descriptive numerical summary and a thematic analysis. Reporting the results and producing the outcome will relate to the overall purpose or research question. Maybe this will be achieved through themes, a framework, a table of strengths and gaps, or a visual representation, including a map or a diagram. You should also consider the meaning of the findings as they relate to the overall study purpose and discuss the implications for future research practice and policy. There's an optional 6th step in the Arksey and O'Malley framework called consultation. This stage provides opportunities for consumer and stakeholder involvement to suggest additional references and provide insights beyond those in the literature. In the Arksey and O'Malley article, they indicate that consultation helped them to identify literature that the search had not found, and also added some additional context to the project. You can use preliminary findings from stage 5, either in the form of a framework, themes, or list of findings, as a foundation from which to inform the consultation. If you take on this step, you should clearly articulate the type of stakeholders with whom you wish to consult, how you will collect the data, for example, focus groups, interviews, or surveys, and how this data will be analyzed, reported, and integrated within the overall study outcome. The consultation stage can also be used specifically for knowledge transfer by translating the preliminary scoping study findings for the community and developing effective dissemination strategies with stakeholders in the field, which offers additional value to the scoping study. If you've had the consultation, you've already done a bit of this knowledge translation and dissemination. Usually this comes into play after you've published. Just because it's published doesn't mean that the work is done. Keeping the audience of your research in mind, you want to consider, What's the best strategy to promote your work? Making sure that the people who need to know about it will know about it and will apply it. What knowledge transfer activities have you planned throughout your organization, your peer group, the news media, the world? Will you use social media to spread the word? Will you prepare a plain language version for the public? Are you ready to provide details on your final report? Be prepared to share your research. On our library website, we have a publication cycle, which has a section on after you publish. Raluca will add that link in the chat. Now for another question to answer in the chat. What type of resources do you need to do a scoping review?
So far we have no answers in the chat. So we're just looking for a resource or two that you would need in order to conduct a scoping review. We've got time, yes. So definitely requires some time. PubMed or other databases, you need to have a few databases in order to do a scoping review. Yeah. Screening software for sure is very helpful. Access to literature, at least 2 screeners, absolutely have to have at least 2 screeners. A librarian or information specialist, those are very handy. Yep. We do have a question that's popped into the chat that I'll just answer out loud right now while we're doing this. Should we be considering the use of platforms like Covidence? Interested to hear more about this. So Covidence is software that is used for screening, for systematic reviews and scoping reviews and other types of knowledge synthesis projects. It's immensely easier to use one of these systems for screening than the way that folks used to have to do it, which was trying to organize a way to do it within their citation manager or using Excel spreadsheets or whatever. So if you have access to one of those, or you have some funding from your grant in order to gain access, it is highly recommended. It will make your life a great deal easier. If you have an affiliation with University of Toronto, you do have access to Covidence itself, but there are other options that exist out there. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, definitely contact your library, and we'll chat with you about your other options. So Distiller, we've got another question about Distiller as a tool for scoping reviews. Again, very good screening tool. I don't personally have experience using it. It's got a few more features than Covidence from what I understand, and therefore, you've got a sort of more options as far as how you go about using it. REB or ethics are generally not required for a scoping review. You would definitely want to like, depending on what you were planning on doing as far as the consultation stage goes, you may or may not need to run that by some people. But as a rule, if you're doing a knowledge synthesis and your what you're studying is the published literature, unless there's other aspects to what you're doing, it's generally not required. We've got a question that Annie, you might be able to answer better than I can. Is there can you go over consultation and its scope again?
Oh, okay. Let me just go back to consultation. So essentially, when you're doing the consultation, you can ask the consumers or the stakeholders if they're aware of any other resources that you've missed in your literature search, for example. They can also add context to the project. So for example, you can have focus groups or interviews or surveys, and in that way, you can collect that sort of information from the consultation. So that's the end of the presentation portion of this session. Raluca will post a link in the chat to our feedback form. We always appreciate feedback on these sessions, especially since this is the first time we're teaching the Scoping Review one. We want to know what worked well, what we could improve. If you missed the link, you can also find it in our workshop and training page linked under Tell Us How We Did. And if you need to contact us, feel free to email us. The email is at the bottom of the slide. As a reminder, we offer free literature searches and database training to UHN staff and students. And now we have plenty of time for questions.
Yes, we do. Okay, so first question we've got, and I haven't answered this in the chat because I'm not honestly sure. Is there a framework or code of ethics for criticizing other studies in the field? It's a very interesting question. If anybody has the answer to that, feel free to either pop it in the chat, or I think at this point you should be able to unmute if you would like.
I'm not familiar with such a framework. However, when you're trying to publish your scoping review, there's a peer review process, and that's an opportunity for peer reviewers to respond to what you've done with criticisms. Some journals have open peer review, which allows you to post, allows anyone to post commentary, and you can always submit a letter to the editor.
Yeah. All right. So our next question is, publishing the protocol for a scoping review may need to occur after the testing of the literature search and strategy and the application of the framework for organizing the literature. How do you trade off the timing for publication along with the testing phase? Yes. A lot of protocols that I have seen be published are done in that sort of stage. They submit them for publication in that stage between having come up with the searches and doing the screening. It's very much up to the team. Ideally, the protocol with as much information as possible, maybe not the finalized search strategies, but as much information as possible, would come out before a lot of, like, before screening, certainly, and a lot of the other aspects start taking place. But it does, it, like, there's no laws on this, so it very much depends on the team and how the project goes, and the specific characteristics of the study that you're doing. Yeah. All right. We don't have any new questions in the chat right now, but we are still here, and we're happy to answer any more if you would like to pop them in the chat. Or I think you should be able to unmute if you would like to ask it out loud. And also, at any point, feel free, like, you don't have to ask it now if you don't want. You can contact the library. We're happy to answer any questions you have at any point.
Just perhaps an unrelated question here. I'm at the Toronto Western Hospital, and is there a librarian here anymore? I know where the library was is sort of a training section now.
Yeah, so there are librarians there several times a week, but I don't think every single day. If you wanted to pop by, you could, and you might find somebody there. Otherwise, please just contact the library, and we'll set you up with the appropriate information specialist for any of your questions. I happen to be one of the information specialists who works with clients at Toronto Western. So there's a solid chance that I would be the person you'd be talking to. I know Annie also works with people at Toronto Western. So it could be one of us, or it might be a couple of other people. So if you send the library an email, and we'll set you up with the right person.
So in your opinion, is there an import difference between putting a protocol on a preprint server or trying to publish it like the JBI? Personally, I think trying to publish it will just get you another citation on your CV, so it doesn't hurt. It just takes a bit longer than if you're posting your protocol on a server.
In terms of budgeting approximately a year, what stages of the scoping review tend to take the longest for a typical size topic? Screening is usually the stage that takes the longest for scoping reviews and systematic reviews, just because there often will be very large sets of results that you are going through. But it also depends on the size of your team. So like if you have a pretty large team and not that many citations, then it might not take you very long to get through that part of the process. Yeah, but if you've only got 2 people screening and you've got, 8,000 results, then you will need to budget some time for that for sure. Oh, Ashley has answered that librarians are at Toronto Western on Mondays and Wednesdays currently. So
All of us are also accessible via email. And
yeah,
so depending on your department, you will have assigned a different information specialist,
yeah,
and you can contact that information specialist directly.
Trying to find this balance of trying to take the concepts from the framework and move it into the screening. And in that stage, it's kind of hard to kind of take your broad concepts and turn it into very simple questions for level 1 screening. What are some of your your thoughts or experiences with respect to that transition from once you've got your literature search, we've got 13,000 references to go through, and then getting the level 1 screening questions so that they're understandable by multiple screeners. Do you have any thoughts in that space?
yeah. So screening for scoping reviews is often feels a little bit more complicated than screening for systematic reviews, because for systematic reviews, you're generally looking for pretty specific things. And for scoping reviews, it's often more, are these items on topic? and that's sort of the sort of sum total, because then part of the analysis is going to be what are the study types and all of the rest of that. So a really key part is going to be being very clear on definitions for things like these are the concepts that need to be involved in order for these studies to be relevant, and this is what we mean by that, and these other things we do not mean when we're talking about these concepts. So these are the things that do not mean the thing that we mean by this concept. And then a lot of the rest of it is piloting. So working through like maybe do 5 or 10 with the whole group, see where the disagreements are, where the confusion is, and then refine the criteria to make it more clear so that everyone's still on the same page. And those are sort of the top level key ways to do that. If there's something specific, like we could talk about it, if there's like something in particular that's difficult about what you're trying to move into screening.
Yeah, I think this goes back to my comment before about the publishing the protocol, in the sense that you're trying to be transparent, but you're still working in this testing phase of testing some of the papers you think they're going to fit in. How do you convey the idea and getting those screening criteria correct, or not correct, as best as possible, so that it's transparent and understandable, because we're for this we're thinking of recruiting maybe 5 or 6 undergrad students, so it also has to be contextual to the expertise of the individuals that are doing the work. So okay, that's perfect. Well, I was glad to hear that we're not doing it wrong. We're in the right space of going back and forth. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And like the thing with scoping review protocols, like obviously with systematic review protocols, like there's a lot that you can lay out ahead of time. You know exactly what kind of study types you're looking for. There's a lot that you know that you're looking for ahead of time. Scoping reviews tend to be a little bit more iterative and a little bit more like you're figuring things out as you go. So there has to be an expectation both within the protocol that is published and then within the published scoping review that this is what we were laying out to do, and this is how that changed, and this is how we think things might change as we go along, because this is a scoping review, and it's not quite as solid when you start out how it's going to end.
Okay, so that type of transparency in the publication, because like this is where the trade-off is. We haven't got to the stage of publishing something because we're still
Yeah.
trying to figure out the nuance of what we're trying to do. So
Yeah.
we're in that gray zone space right now. So okay, that's perfect. That's great advice. Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Thank you all for attending, and do feel free to contact us if you've got any questions.